This is the audiometric testing presentation regarding the implementation of Clause 58 of the New South Wales Work Health and Safety Regulation 2017. Initially, we did record the live version from the presentation that we did on Wednesday, the 1st of March. Unfortunately, there were some technical issues with that recorded file. So we're just re-recording a recorded version today for use for people that weren't able to attend on Wednesday, the 1st of March. My name's Mark Moskovich and I'm the State Inspector for Working Environment. So before we get rolling, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of land on which we're meeting today. I'm on the land of the Darug people. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connection to the lands and waters of New South Wales. I also acknowledge and pay my respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are here listening to this presentation today. Now, Clause 58 of the Work Health and Safety Regulation, audiometric testing, has been subject to consecutive exemption orders since the regulations came into effect back in 2012. To provide certainty to stakeholders moving forward, extensive consultation in relation to Clause 58 occurred late last year. This consultation showed that there was clear support to have Clause 58 commence at the expiry of the existing exemption order. Now, as a result, the New South Wales Government has approved its commencement from the 1st of January 2024. A PCBU's duties under Clause 58 are triggered when they frequently require their workers to use hearing protection in order to protect them from noise-related hearing loss in circumstances where noise levels exceed the exposure standards, which are an LAEQ 8-hour equivalent of 85 decibels A-weighted or a peak noise level of 140 decibels C-weighted. The testing must be provided within 3 months of commencement for new workers and in any event every 2 years. So Exemption Order 02121 expires on the 31st of December 2023 with Clause 58 commencing on the 1st of January 2024. As we've already mentioned, a worker is eligible to be provided with mandatory audiometric testing if they're frequently required by their workplace to use hearing protection to protect them from the risk of hearing loss due to exposure to noise above the exposure standard. This means that any eligible new workers that you engage from the 1st of January 2024 will need to be provided with audiometric testing within 3 months of their commencement. For existing eligible workers who are employed before the 31st of December 2023, they'll need to be provided with audiometric testing within 2 years, that is by the 1st of January 2026. After an eligible new worker has received their first audiometric testing, they then fall into the 2-year cycle with the rest of the workers from that date of testing. Safe Work New South Wales obviously understands that the commencement of Clause 58 from the 1st of January 2024 may impact upon work health and safety consultation as well as safety or business priorities. For that reason, we'll be developing and publishing a range of guidance and support material over 2023 that will assist New South Wales businesses to implement these important changes in their workplaces. In the meantime, we recommend that New South Wales businesses do some work around preparing for the 1st of January next year in terms of reviewing existing noise sources in your workplace to reconsider whether elimination, substitution, isolation, engineering or administrative controls can be applied. If you do that and you can successfully do that, you won't need to use hearing protection and won't need to do the audiometric testing. And you can find more information about applying the hierarchy of control to noise on our noise web pages. We would also recommend that you consult with your workers about how audiometric testing will be prioritised and rolled out for the different workers in your workplace. Further, in consultation with your workers, you can start developing a system of work that will ensure all of your eligible workers are provided with testing as required and that the results are managed appropriately. These are just some important points that put audiometric testing into the broader context of managing noise in the workplace. So bear in mind that whilst we're talking today about Clause 58 and the requirement for audiometric testing for particular workers, under Clause 36 of the regulation, a PCBU must apply the hierarchy of control to any work health and safety risk in their workplace. This means that before going straight to the use of hearing protection, workplaces must consult with workers and decide if control measures such as elimination, isolation, substitution, engineering, or administrative controls could be applied to that situation. Only after those control measures have been ruled out or they're not practicable can hearing protection be provided. SafeWork New South Wales wants to remind New South Wales businesses that consultation with workers before a risk control decision such as this has been made is a legal requirement under work health and safety legislation. I'll now go through a few of the questions that we received in the live broadcast yesterday and give some answers to those so that you get the benefit of those questions as well, because there was some very good questions in there. So the first one was, would a pre-employment medical that includes audiometric testing satisfy the requirements of Clause 58? And the answer is yes, it would. So if you're doing a pre-employment check on your new workers, that's a really good idea for a whole bunch of reasons. But also importantly, that would satisfy the first test for that new worker, and then you just run them through the 2-year cycle after that. We've got a question here that says, how does this work? How does this apply to labour hire companies? And the answer, I guess, in short, is that, well, there's two answers. One is that the PCBU that pays the worker in the broad scheme of things is also the PCBU that's required to provide PPE for the work that the worker's doing if that PPE is necessary. Now, in saying that, there's a provision in other parts of our Act for two PCBUs, so a host employer, for example, and an agency, to consult and coordinate around the shared work health and safety duties that they have. So as long as there's some sort of agreement as to who provides that equipment, that could be the host employer if that agreement is between the host employer and the labour hire agency. And there's scope there for those two PCBUs that share that duty around that worker to share that cost, but they're not obliged to. Fundamentally, the cost stays with whoever the PCBU is that pays the worker and engages the worker to do the work. Are all workers required to be tested? No, they're not. So it's only, as I mentioned earlier on, the workers that need to be tested are those workers that are frequently required by their employer or the PCBU to wear hearing protection because of exposure to potentially hazardous noise, so noise over the exposure standard. We had the person ask, can an employer use a calibrated or certified audio testing device to assess or monitor noise levels, or is a hygienist required to do the assessment? I think they were getting two aspects confused. One aspect is, and what they're talking about is noise measurement at the source. So measuring the noise exposure of the person in the workplace, for example, at a machine. That kind of thing can be done by a competent person in the workplace. When it becomes more complex, it needs to be done by an occupational hygienist. But what we're talking about today is audiometric testing. So, for example, a worker might go to a workplace and have that exposure. At some point down the track, within that 2-year period, if they're eligible to have that audiometric testing, they go and get the audiometric testing done, but that is done by an audiologist in accordance with the relevant Australian standards. So they're not the same people. Audiologists generally don't test noise in the workplace, and hygienists who test noise in the workplace don't do audiology for the most part. They're two separate jobs. So hopefully that answers that question. Somebody asked, what about indirect noise exposure? So in terms of the eligibility of PPE, so if you've got workers that are going to somebody else's workplace, you've still got a duty for your workers to protect their hearing. So In some circumstances, you might give them hearing protection, but if you've got workers, for example, subcontractors working on a building site for a long period of time, and you know that the building site's noisy, those discussions around noise levels would come up in the engagement discussions that you have with a principal contractor or the owner of a host employer employment site, like a factory or something, and you'd have those discussions as one PCBU talking to another PCBU about a shared duty for the worker that you're sending there. If they indicate that it's noisy, it's still your duty to provide that PPE. And if you're having to do that frequently, then that would trigger the clause 58 for you as an employer or a PCBU, even though your workers are working somewhere else. Somebody asks here, if business is currently underway running hearing tests because they already do audiometric testing for their workers, do they need to redo it, or can they just continue on? And the answer to that is they can just continue on as long as they observe those 2-year cycles. Somebody asks, what if the training document states that hearing protection must be worn if required? What they're saying there is that they're talking about a decision, the risk decision that the PCBU has made, that the person doing that task needs to wear hearing protection. So if that task is done frequently, or they need to use that hearing protection frequently because of that task, then that would satisfy the clause 58 and they would need to do the audiometric testing. Somebody else asks, are there protections for workers' privacy or audiometric testing results? And there are. Broadly speaking, they're medical results, so they fall under the Health Records and Information Privacy Act of 2002. Somebody mentions they're 85 decibels over an 8-hour period. What about if the noise is indirect or intermittent? What that gets to is if you've got a noise that's intermittent and you do some noise measurements, the LAEQ 8-hour represents an equivalent noise level over the day. So you can have somebody who's got no noise for 3 hours and a whole bunch of noise for another 5 hours. You still have to calculate that noise exposure over that whole day, taking that into account. Once you have that noise exposure level and you make some decision around how you're going to deal with it, either through isolation, engineering, elimination, that kind of stuff, if you can't do that and you have to use PPE for that noise, then you're using the PPE for exposure to hazardous noise levels. Therefore, it triggers clause 58 and you need to do the audiometric testing. That's all the questions that we've got so far from yesterday's presentation. As I mentioned in the presentation, between now and the 1st of January next year, SafeWork will be developing and distributing a whole bunch of guidance material around some of these interpretations, as well as around things to support with the implementation of audiometric testing programs, that kind of stuff. So there'll be lots of support provided well before the time that you need to start doing those activities. But if you have any further questions, you can contact SafeWork New South Wales on 13 10 50 or contact@safework.nsw.gov.au, or you can email the Working Environment team directly at workingenvironment, which is one word, at safework.nsw.gov.au. I'd like to thank you for listening to this recording and hope that you got something out of it, and hope that it's useful in implementing an important part of the work health and safety regulation to protect workers' hearing. Thanks so much.